Hello, malt mates. Welcome to the Whisky Bothy. I'm Ralphie, your host, and I am going to present in review number 1096 a Scotch single malt whisky, a brand which I have never reviewed before. It's a new distillery. It's recently just arrived on the market, and I was curious enough about it that I wanted to buy a bottle and create a review so that there's a bit of a timeline on the internet to show how whiskies arrive and change and all the rest of it over the years. So I'm aware that I'm not the only person that's going to be reviewing this whisky, and there's a lot to talk about this. This is from Inchdairney Distillery. In Fife, I think Fife now has sufficient distilleries. And Fife, by the way, is that area of land south of Dundee and north of Edinburgh on the east coast of Scotland, which kind of juts out a little bit into the North Sea. It's called, in Scotland we call it the Kingdom of Fife, because originally it was a kingdom of the Picts. And it has a very substantial history, by the way. And in recent years, we've seen the arrival of a number of very interesting distilleries into the Kingdom of Fife, including Daft Mill, good example, and Kingsbarns. Just two illustrative examples. There are others. And there's this one, Inchdairney. And the brand they have bottled this is Kinlassy. Kinglassy. See, that's a capital G. So it's not Kinlassy, it's Kinglassy. I'm not going to make any comments on the bottle at the moment, says me rather cryptically. I will address that in review number 1096 Extras, which is coming along after this review. But I think there's quite a lot to say about the actual presentation of this whisky, and I can see that they're looking to stand out and emphasise the singularity of their single malt in this particular style and presentation of bottle. Now, I'm saying nothing about that at the moment. If you want some entertaining content, be sure to watch review 1096 Extras. Let's focus specifically on this whisky. And starting as the spirit breathes a little bit in the glass, starting with some declared information. Now, where's my steampunker? Here it is. Absolutely essential tool for every whisky drinker. This was distilled in 2017 and bottled in 2025. It's 8 years old. It's bottled at 46.3%, and the peatiness is declared at 50 plus ppm. ppm meaning parts per million. Right. With that presentation, we're invited to accept that this is a heavily peated whisky. And they also go on at the information provided on this tin, which I've put to the side for the moment, that they have a very specific way of preparing their barley and distilling their barley to get the flavour and the profile and the event out of the ingredients and the process. It's unchill filtered, and I can assure you that's as natural a natural colour as you're ever going to find. However, it's also worth noting at this early stage that as I was perusing this whisky, because I've got to do the perusing on several occasions, I put some in a glass with water and put it in the fridge, and I ask you, does that look like a lot of Scotch mist? Bear in mind, they are declaring it to be unchill filtered, and frankly, I don't doubt them for a minute. But as you can see, there's only a slight change in the appearance of the two whiskies. This one, in my right-hand side, that you're seeing probably on the left, is completely neat. The one in the fridge glass has had a significant amount of water added to it, which should really just dilute the whisky enough that the barley oils and the oak cask oils should be coming through. But I'm seeing very little of it. And in my opinion, and it's purely a personal opinion, I think it's the way that they're processing the grain and distilling, which is causing a lightness in the final result. Not that you'd think it was particularly light when you first nose this whisky. When you first open the bottle, it's a big smoke blast. It is a genuine and legitimate smoke monster. Not a peat monster, a smoke monster. However, when you pour a new glass, after a few weeks, you put your nose in the glass, and the first thing you notice is how much lighter and fruitier it has become after a short period of moderated oxidization. In other words, taking the stopper off and on the bottle a few times, and every time we pour a glass, we're replacing the air inside the bottle and the oxygen that's contained within that air. So let's have a first taste, and I'm rolling around the glass a little bit because at this point I'm getting mixed messages. The coat line in the glass is thin. The beading is incredibly small, suggesting a very young spirit. It's kind of holding well, but then when the legs appear, they're very intermittent and they're rather what you call straggly. Fair enough. The smokiness is prominent on the palate. On the arrival, through the development, you have this light background of soft vanillas and a little bit of white wininess and a touch of melon. On the foreground, you have an intense carbonic and fusile, increasingly fusile as the bottle goes down, note of smoke. Its first impressions, I have to say, are not particularly positive unless you're just looking for a big, beefy smoke hit. So I'm going to add some water now using my trusted soda spoon. It contains exactly, let's get rid of that drop water there, 5 millilitres. I'm holding up to the light now. I'm looking at the versimetry. I'm looking at the nature of that versimetry, and the versimetry assimilates incredibly quickly. This is a young whisky behaving even younger than the age statement. And again, I attribute that to the style of production. I don't mean that as an insult, and I don't mean that as a compliment either. I mean it as an observational fact from someone that's experienced with whisky. The water very quickly assimilates into the whisky with very little residual versimetry, and the whole thing comes across as very lightweight despite the heavy notes of the smoke. On the nose, slight glucose, soft vanillas. It really comes across as a young experience. Taste? That's better. That is definitely better. Having added some water in a very short space of time, the the actual barley sugar notes and the vanilla notes, the biscuity notes of the malted barley are much more integrated with that smoke. The smoke is no longer just sitting over the top of the event like a rather belligerent and bruised storm cloud. It's much more integrated and involved with the whisky. Another sip, and I'll give you a few more tasting notes. It's an oddity. It's a fusile, intense, not so much peated, but chimney smoke. It's the sort of taste that you get when you actually go into a chimney and scrape soot out from a chimney, and you mix it in with some vodka and you let it sit for a couple of weeks, and you get this phenomenal, unique spirit. I've done it, so I know what I'm looking at here. And here we have a peculiarly familiar representation of that. Certainly, when I first opened the bottle, I was hugely impressed by the big smoke cloud, because personally I love smoky whiskies. I really used to like Lagavulin, and I used to like Bowmore because they did it so well back in the 1980s and the 1990s, because that was a very different age for the production of whisky. And these brands have changed so much now. I can assure you they are not what they used to be, Lagavulin and Bowmore. And you notice this big time when you actually buy the old bottles at auction and then sit them side by side, glass by glass, and compare the two of them together. Anyway, I'm not going to go any further with that train of narrative, because I want to focus back here in this whisky. I'll put the bottle to the front now so you can really see the bottle. It's a very designer bottle. There's obviously been a big investment gone into this bottle. And you really notice it in the price of this whisky. Whereas other new distilleries are selling their whisky maybe between £60 and £70 a bottle, with Inchdairney they're selling from £70 to £80 a bottle. And part of the narrative is that they're only producing this smoky peaty whisky for a very short period of time each year. It's very ultra small batch, although the actual volume is never truly articulated. It's never really defined, so it's a generalised message. And I'm really not particularly convinced by it. But I'm going to take one more taste of this before I give the malt mark. I have to conclude by saying this has been a peculiar experience. I've kind of enjoyed it, but at the same time it's been enormously frustrating. And it's the whisky, I'm enjoying the whisky, but as time goes on, the fragile nature of it is really manifesting itself clearer and clearer as the bottle goes down and as it oxidizes. This seems to be particularly prone to swift and sudden oxidization in just a relatively few weeks. And I think that there is something in the construct of this. There's something delicate which has come across initially as intense, but that intensity is just falling away. Final taste. It's a simple whisky. The phenolics are becoming fruitier. It's losing its complexity as a smoke monster, and it's transferring into a fruity bitterness, which is sustained for as much as you would expect an 8-year-old whisky, single malt, to sustain it. And the finish, slightly tannic, fusile, phenolic, And it's almost as if the complexity of the experience swiftly diminishes with each pour from the bottle. So I would recommend that if you're buying a bottle of this, you buy it to share with friends, because it's going to change substantially in a short space of time. And I know from experience that many of you might find that a little bit disappointing. This is a very interesting distillery. They've got particular ways of working, which I'm sure they regard as innovative. But the bottom line is, I think they're setting themselves a challenge to establish their identity, but I wish them well. Malt mark. $80 out of 100. Very interesting experience, but personally speaking, I doubt I'm going to be reviewing from this distillery again for quite a long time. I'll see you in my next review, malt mates.